Hello, my name's Willard van de Bogart. Today is January 21st, 2019.
Isn't it the 31st?
Oh, the 31st, sorry, it's the 31st. I'm in Hanover, New Hampshire with Sonia Sheridan. She's, it's about 4 degrees below zero here today. This is a second video. We did one together last December in 2018. And Sonia is going to be coming out with a brand new book, fifth in a series that she's done over her life. And the title of the book that she's coming out with is Weaving Global Minds. And I think we're going to talk about the meaning of weaving of global minds and how important this book is when it's compared to the long history Sonia has worked with, all her ideas over the years. So we're going to start with introducing the book. And the book, as I said before, is Weaving Global Minds. But the very new thing in the book is that it's an interactive book. And it's also a gaming book. So Sonia, how is the book interactive and how is it gaming?
Well, partly it's gaming because people gather together across the globe, and in that case they meet one another, they begin to talk about ideas, and you have something emerging constantly different. Of course, there are certain underlying ideas that I had hoped for. One was to reach a population, whether they start at 3 or 5 years old and go to 105 years old, that they have a way in which they could have a non-hacked, non-manipulated item that they could read about. And when it turned out that there would be special individuals, that they could pick that individual and have, again, direct contact with an individual who is thinking and producing.
Mm-hmm. I think we also mentioned earlier, before we began the video, that it's a world gaming book. In other words,
it's global.
It's a global book in the sense that the book is in your hand. It's not interactive as a network, but it's an interactive based on people around the world that are in the book.
Precisely. What happens is that somehow or another, people hear that something's going on, they ask to become members. I don't want a large community. I want a smaller community, so there's conversation. And so somehow from Europe, especially this time, we attracted a very, very interesting group of people who were thinking, changing, emerging into a new era. And that is unlike World War II, where we and Americans were, in a sense, the advance, and Europe had gone into the darkness. Now we're in the darkness, and Americans now are in the opposite position. Mm-hmm. And so there has to find new ways for an enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And that new ways, we're hoping that this book, which emerged really from just a simple idea that we are going to make our 5th book with Facebook. Mm-hmm. And it was that simple. And then gradually, when I noticed that it was particularly those coming out of Europe who seemed to be quite anxious to participate in something that was asking them a very reasonable question. And that's part of gaming, is asking the questions and finding out answers that you maybe didn't know were there. The questions were there.
And this was done on Facebook, so many of the entries in the book are musicians and artists, poets.
Every one of these people on these books here are from different fields. There's filmmakers, there's old-time artists, there's scientists. They come from, notice, the UK and Australia. They come from, in other words, this one is a lawyer and has a new system, global system, and she has been not only in the army, but she's also been, what are those movies they have in which they have the main lawyers that international lawyers that come together and kind of set the pattern for the future.
The tribunals or something like that? I'm not sure.
Something like tribunals. There's a name for that kind of doctor, that kind of lawyer. And this is a very, very interesting article by Jeannie Lieberman, because she literally participated as judge advocate in Europe, and many had those experiences.
And for those of us that are in the book,
Yes.
there's we could hear on Facebook. We could actually hear the artwork that was being submitted. So everyone in the book can go to the internet and look up the artist and actually see the work.
Precisely, they could, as they say, look at the name, see the name, and then pick that name and go to Google or whatever means you want to use, and learn something about it.
Well, we'll talk about that community in a little bit, even further, because it gets expanded quite a bit.
Yes, it has.
It has indeed. The other idea that Sonia has brought to my attention that's interesting to think about is that the book is not only a book, but it's a non-book. It doesn't actually function solely like a book. So what did you mean by a non-book?
Well, I think that what happened is the book just emerged. It was part of an emerging system. And that means it's part of a new way of visualizing time. And as people wanted to participate in some way, we all together, not just singly. I've written somewhere that I felt more like the conductor of an orchestra in which every person was playing a different instrument, and I was merely conducting it in a way. But they also were conducting. So as they came from different fields, they began talking with one another, and gradually the book kind of emerged. It just emerged. It just grew. It was like a seed that was planted. And that seed then, literally, as you see all around here, the important thing is each one of these people has what's called a PDF file. And they get 2 pages, and those 2 pages are set as can never be broken apart the way they are in a regular book. They are, in other words, you have a picture, and then you have an article, and you have something else. These must stay together. In other words, every person who participates, this person, for instance, Francesca Giuliani in Italy, she has to keep her 2 pages together, and everybody does. And that means on one page, you might tell, who are you? Why would you be interested in me? Why did I invent this when I was 10 years old?
Right.
Various things. And then the other might be images, or they could be mixed up somehow. But you own those 2 pages, and nobody changes those pages. And nobody is edited. They use their own font, they use their own ideas, their own images, and that means each of these people is different. So let's say you're a 5-year-old, and you find this in your school library. And unlike the internet where it might have been hacked, you're not going to be able to hack that book. On the other hand, you can take that book from the library. If nobody's going to burn it, or if they're going to, the kid can, or the adult or the 105-year-old can just hide that book, and the book is still a viable means of information. In this case, this book would have all these different people. And as you went through and looked, you could say, I would like to speak to Jack Wilgus now. He sounds very interesting to me. So I think I'm just going to go and try to get a hold of Jack Wilgus and find out if he wants to talk with me. And I'm certain all these people in that book would love to talk to anybody, whether they're 3 or 5 or 105.
Well, I like that 100. You mentioned that I'm going to jump to another question in the end here. You said 105-year-old, and when I heard that, we had talked before, and we easily talk about a 5-year-old. I'm more accustomed to hearing a 5-year-old spoken than I am a 105-year-old. But this book is a time. It deals with, as you said before, it has a time aspect to it.
Yes.
So whether you're a 5-year-old or a 105-year-old, that is a new perspective that you're giving the book. Could you explain that?
I think that the connection between the 105-year-old and the 5-year-old is extremely important because their vantage point for visualizing and understanding the nature of time is quite different. The one who's the elder has all those decades behind of seeing things change and emerge and change and repeat, and how systems work in a way. And the child immediately, who plays from the beginning, begins to understand these are older people, but they play. And that's extremely important, is the ability to play all through all those years.
And you mentioned time problems, like a child reading the book, or even a young adult, old adult, or older adult, is dealing with time problems. How would you expand upon a time problem?
Well, I taught, at the Art Institute of Chicago, and there I had program generative systems, but within that program, they were constantly changing courses as we learned. And one of the courses was called holography. And one of them was called, I'm sorry, I can't forget all, I don't remember all of those right now. But the fact is, they dealt with just such problems as time. And as people from the various countries that seemed to be interested in this program and brought different points of view about how they visualize time, and were able to use either photographs or drawings or any means of visualization or words to begin to explain their ideas about what time meant to them.
And you mentioned, after you had mentioned that, you had talked about how it got into art and science and technology as a result of dealing with time problems. How did you explain that?
That had a lot to do with literally setting up the courses. If we had not had certain kinds of problems in the United States that aroused the population, we probably would not have been looking for the equipment and machinery that was being dumped by industry that gave us a new perspective about how rapidly you could produce ideas and get them out to the world. And that, giving that idea of time, got you more deeply into exactly why is it that with light your hand stretches this way, and when you pull the light still going ahead, and you pull your hand back way, you reduce the size of the hand. So watching those particular, really not really very new machines, but for the artists, and that brought technologists in, it brought scientists in. And what I think was most important about the program is the interesting people from around the world, such people from England, for instance, who did almost 16 volumes of Science and Civilization in China, and yet his original field had been biology. And why was that important? That was important because why did he switch? Because he went to China. He found out in China that they thought differently. And as a result of that, he switched his entire field from the study of the fetus and how it developed arms and fingers. And that's Joseph Needham I'm talking about. That's a very great man. The Chinese considered him the great scientist of the era. And there's no question about it. He's now dead. But he left us at least 16 volumes, and they're still going on, Science and Civilization of China. And our people in our courses at the Art Institute of Chicago, they were talking with him, they were meeting him. It's interesting because some of the artists were not at all interested in the scientists. And what an opportunity, because those students who remained, and for instance, John Mabey, who was taking the video at the time, and asked Needham, what would you like to talk about? He said, would you like to hear about my life? And we said, absolutely, we want to hear about your life. And he explained how, because of his work in biology and studying how fingers grew, how arms grew, that he got to go around China, and he found that they thought in such a fascinating way through all those centuries and developed a different way of thinking, that he literally switched and then wrote 16 volumes of Science and Civilization.
this brings us back to what we were talking. We're talking about the book originally as a book or a non-book, and I jumped because of the 105 and a 5-year-old or a 105-year-old. But the next issue we were talking about was the book provides a new idea exchange, promoting the understanding of new idea exchange. So the book itself is helpful for new idea exchange.
The book itself emerged. We had already written using Facebook 4 books before. This would be the 5th. The reason that weaving came up, because I had put up a drawing, and the drawing is inside, it's on the back here, they have a drawing of it, and it was simply a drawing showing a hand that is taking threads and pulling those threads together so that they're woven.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was actually the people themselves who said that first drawing has to be in there because it shows the way we got the idea for weaving.
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, it gradually developed until you notice there's a very straight line around the book now, and everything is just more like a book than it actually is like a weaving. Mm-hmm. It kind of changes. Mm-hmm. The physical part of it changes precisely because of the nature of the structure, the motion, the change. So you're studying change, you're studying time. And the most interesting thing is each person has an equal place. Maybe because I live in a retirement community that's a Quaker place where every individual counts. That has beginning to have an impact upon me, because here each person is equal. Each person gets the 2 pages like a mural. Each person gets the same size name, and each person has a flag from his or her country. And they're equal. They're a community in a way. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that many of these people now, some live in Asia, some live in Europe, some live in the United States, some in South America, some in Canada, but they're in contact with one another.
Right.
What you hope that the 5-year-old will find is somebody with whom they can talk and like, mm-hmm. maybe years from now. And why a book, and why not on the internet? Simply because it can't be hacked. It can be burned. But if you happen to get it from a library, and the library has burned all the books in your country, that's possible. That's happened here in the United States, in New York City, New York, upper state New York. Well, then the child who happened to have that book can bring it out and look and see, oh, these people, I'm going to look at some of these. And then they find that one person, Scott Forshaw, writes that when I was 10 years old, I made this. Wham! I'm going to speak to him. I wonder if he'll talk to me.
I'm gonna jump to Scott, because this is the next part of the conversation is going to deal. Now we've covered why the book is made. It's a networking book, and the individuals have equal place. But the other thing you're very interested in is, as I noted, and we talked about it a little bit, is the weaving of the ideas for the future. This is we'll get into the future aspects of Sonia's book, which is very, very interesting. She's here in Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth College is, and Dartmouth is very much interested in quantum computing. Hanover, New Hampshire, with Dartmouth, also has the Hood Museum, and at the Hood Museum we have the archive of all of Sonia's work in the Hood Museum, over maybe 7 decades of work or more. So now we're going to enter the conversation. We're going to start, and we'll go all the way up to quantum physics and quantum computing and beyond. But let's start simply with, how is the book, as we put it before, weaving ideas for the future? How do you see that?
We're weaving ideas not just in the construction of it, but the fact that it can be constructed by people working together all across this globe, who somehow or another learn from one another, add information from one another, and gradually create the system. So although I say I'm the leader of the band or the orchestra, nevertheless each one is from a different field, and they have different perspectives, and they now sharing them. So you have an actual practical way of bringing people together. Pre-thought, not necessarily. What you have is a philosophy, an idea, a sense of small communities, how they work together. All that is an experience, and that's why I said before, old age is tremendously important, because you bring that experience together, and if it's not a locked brain and an open brain, then you merge along with that small, and I always indicate small community, because it's quite different. Does that mean only small community? No, you don't set those limits at all. What you do simply is follow your own path, see how it fits in with other paths, and most of all is, what is your message as a human being who's not yet, I have hip replacements, that robot does, so part of me is robot, right?
Right.
On the other hand, the fact is that, what is it to be human? Share that before we're gone as a species. What is it to be human?
Right.
Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it balanced in the middle? Who are you? What are you about? What can you tell me through the things that you make? And by the way, when we lost connection with our hands...
Yes, I'm going to get to that. That's a very important idea.
Okay.
I think I want to hear her talk about how we've lost our capabilities with our hands. I have that. But the thing is, maybe I could call you the time elder for us, because many of us in the book are much different ages. None of us have reached your age. And many of us, myself included, have interacted with another person in the book. And I know that others have interacted in the book as a result of you bringing the book out.
Yes.
And one of those people that you mentioned before, Scott Forshore, is very much into computers and how information is stored in a computer.
Yes, and quantum systems.
And quantum systems. But you had mentioned before that now that you're older, you can say things in fewer words.
Fewer words.
And Scott is very interested and heard that, and was very interested in the compression of information, where his technology, his algorithmic design, is able to extract from a minimum amount of information that is put into the computer and expand it. Could you talk a little bit about your ideas about, as you get older, you're able to convey more ideas with less words?
It's not just age alone. I think it's how you were thinking and working before. If you set up systems that were examining some of these ideas, it kind of floats around in you, and suddenly you reach a certain age and you realize, now I'll be 94 in April, okay? In April. And to me that's close to a century. And as a result of that, I find that instead of having to write an entire paragraph, 2 words will come to me. That's why I said to you, one was gaming, and what was the other word?
Interactive, I think it was.
Well, that has to do with gaming. So there were 2 words. And the book.
Gaming and the book.
And gaming and the book.
The book is a game, but not a game as playful as well. Play with ideas.
I think that children, the younger they are, the more they understand gaming. They play. And one of the things I liked about Douglas Dybvig, a chemist who was responsible for the world's first color copier at 3M Corporation, is that he understood right away that play was very important. And he used to tell the scientists, please go in and watch Sonia having fun. Because the children learn so rapidly, not because they're young and have fresh brains alone, it's because they play, and that is gaming. They play.
Now, I don't want to lose the thread. You were talking about how working with the hands in the community. Let's expand on that again.
I think that one of the things we lose with technology is we gain, obviously we gain. We gain freedom to not wash our clothing in the river. And we get a washing machine. But on the other hand, what you lose is your connection with your hands, which are the human part of you, with the objects you're working on. That's why people will open farms and grow plants and crops and have a closer feeling with themselves as human beings, what it is to be human. That humans, there are people without hands, and notice what they try to do is make electronic hands so they can feel something somehow. But the sensibility is important that animals have, birds have, they all have it, some sort of sensibility. And that's what people should be probably looking more at. What am I as a human being? How should I be thinking? How to express myself to others so they know that we are a related species somehow.
Scott was very interested in your ideas, and he was he was one of the first members in England. A group of a Russian oligarch had started a program called Asgardia, which is a community of people in outer space.
Yes.
And Scott, because he was one of the first members of that organization, he had the right to add soft information in the hard drive
Yes.
of a satellite that Asgardia had put up in space, which is now going around the Earth. And Scott uploaded onto that satellite your work.
That's right.
And this is a nation that's in the future will be a nation beyond Earth.
Yes.
And Sonia's work will be on that nation in their computer. I wanted you to talk about the archival aspects of keeping our ideas alive as we go into the future.
Well, one of the reasons that I was happy and delighted with Scott's foreshaw asking me would I mind having my work in a quantum system, and I thought, hey, that would great. I'd like to know what it looks like, that would be great. And that means that how do you explain a work of art? And an art student will say, it speaks for itself. Well, there's some truth in all error. It does, in a sense. But if you don't understand the language, and you haven't been taught the language, then it doesn't speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate, so as far as, let's get back to the point, so don't.
Well, the point is, I think, as I had before, it's the compression. Dealing with, I guess it goes back to dealing with time problems. You're going to have,
as soon as you got access during the 1960s, 70s, of machines being thrown away by industry because they were upgrading everything, and that gave the artists who had no money access to machines that dealt with time. How do they deal with time? They've got electricity, they've got magnetics, they've got thermal thing, they've got all sorts of possibilities. And those are adding new dimensions of time and new dimensions of just motion. And as a result, light and how light is used. And immediately you've expanded yourself into, people will say, technological error. And then people realize, but how come when the artist had a dream, and how did it suddenly get to technology? Well, in between, there's a scientist, and the scientist says, no, that makes a lot of sense, and this is what we did. Usually it's 10 or 20 years after the artist said it, said what they did. And as a result of that, you get another way of moving in time. You're moving in time through the various different aspects of learning,
You had mentioned Arthur C. Clarke and his work, and then your work.
Of whose work?
Arthur C. Clarke, the science
Oh,
fiction.
yes, Clarke.
And you had made some comment that you had done some artwork that preceded some of the things that he had written about 25 years into the future.
That's right.
So I think people should know about that. But the question here is, how do you envision the artist working in the future, in a, let's say, in a space colony that has access to all the archive problems that were solved by art students using time problems? Where do you see that? Is that a good question?
It will depend upon the nature of the country, whether students can get into the schools. The politics and the government, they're very important. We're now on a spiral down, way down. We're where the Europeans were during World War II. So that switched. So the society is very important. That's why the program for young people called STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, has been now gradually changing into STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. And I have added S on mine, STEAMs. And that is because that means society. It depends upon what's happening in the society. If a kid can't go to school, or they can't pay their debts, if they can't have a home and they end up homeless, all of that is going to determine what's going to happen to that human being.
So this book is a representation of an ideal of how people should work together.
This is one thing it does. It shows how people can work together and how together they keep adding ideas. In fact, I almost never criticize people who are working with me because that I don't think is really my job. My job is to lead the orchestra, and I don't say to the violinist, oh, you don't play well or anything. We just ignore that.
Right.
And we see where they're going. And you'll find out very quickly, it may take a month, it may take 2 months in doing it, and all of a sudden the person will, he's seen the others, and will go his own path. They go their own path, because each person, part of the understanding is each person has a different path. And as individuals, those individual paths are important. That makes for the variety of society. That's why the United States was such a powerful nation for such a long time, because they were the first really nation with almost every single person from someplace on the globe.
Right.
We had them all.
Right.
In fact, only one, Ishi, who was put in the Smithsonian, the last Indian, he was the last of his species. He was put in the museum, you know. And there was no place else to put him. That way they got his language would disappear with him.
Right.
So life goes on, and understanding certain fundamentals. It's interesting, my mother, I once asked her, because she met my father in the philosophy department at Ohio State, and she was in philosophy, and I said, Mom, why did you take philosophy? She said, having come from a very small community in far northern Minnesota, I didn't know what to study, and I thought maybe with philosophy I could figure out what I should be studying. And part of maybe all of this is to learn from one another the various aspects of something we might not know. And you notice, as you said, about these people, many of them have hooked up together. And one maybe in Asia, and one in Europe, or one in South America.
I've hooked up with Lino in Italy.
In Italy, that's right.
And he was dealing with time and various
I was
natures.
very interested in the fact that some of the first people coming in came from Italy. We got a whole lot from Italy, which was very interesting. Well, that means they were searching for something.
I think now I think we've gained a lot of interest. I hope you've gotten interested in what this book is going to be about. And I think we've said good things about what it represents. So I think we'll probably just finish this and say goodbye. I think we've had over a half hour of explaining it. So, yeah, any last words you would like to say?
Remember, we're all humans, and people want to know what it is to be human. So we have positive, negative. Isn't there some balance in between where we realize that we're fundamentally all the same species? We all came out of Africa. They used to say 45,000 years ago, and now what they say, it's at least 100,000 years ago.
Well, we all thank you, Sonia. You've made us all think about things we've probably not tackled before, and the book sort of encapsulates many of those things. So that's it, and I hope we can present another video in the future. Thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you for making it possible.
Good.
I never mentioned Don Dunn once, which was so important, because you need great minds. And he did the pixel editor, which Atari didn't have. And he receives the certificate for the Guinness first gaming thing on the internet.
And he's in the book. He's mentioned in the book as well.
Oh, yes, he's mentioned in the book because he died, but I did put the article out about him. Yeah. I think I